The Sheriff's Wager by Audrey Sinclair. The silver dollar spun through the air, catching the lamplight as it arched toward the saloon floor. Catherine Whitmore held her breath, watching 23 men lean forward in their chairs, their eyes fixed on the coin that would determine her fate. She had not intended to find herself in the center of a wager when she'd arrived in Cedar Ridge that morning. Indeed, she had planned nothing more adventurous than collecting the inheritance her late uncle had left her, a small property that would provide the independence she craved. What she had not anticipated was discovering that her uncle's bequest came with a rather significant complication in the form of Sheriff Jake Morrison, a man who seemed to believe that a lady from Boston had no business owning property in his territory. The coin struck the wooden floor with a sharp ping and rolled in diminishing circles before settling. Heads. "Well, I'll be," murmured old Pete from behind the bar. "The lady won." Catherine smoothed her traveling dress and lifted her chin, meeting the sheriff's incredulous stare with what she hoped appeared to be serene confidence. In truth, her knees threatened to buckle beneath her wool skirt, but she had not endured the rigors of traveling alone from Massachusetts only to crumble now. "It appears I have," she said, her voice carrying the crisp accent that marked her as decidedly foreign to this rough mining town. "Which means, Sheriff Morrison, that you shall accompany me to survey my property tomorrow morning, and you shall treat my claim with the respect due any legitimate landowner." The sheriff's jaw tightened. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and lean, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that spoke of long days under the western sun. His dark hair needed cutting, and his shirt could have benefited from the attention of a competent laundress, but there was something in his green eyes that made Catherine's pulse quicken in a most inappropriate manner. "And if I'd won?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Then I would have returned to Boston on tomorrow's stage." She had made the wager in a moment of desperation, when it became clear that the sheriff intended to make her acquisition of her inheritance as difficult as possible. The terms had seemed reasonable enough, a simple coin toss to determine whether she would be given a fair hearing or dismissed outright. Now, however, as she observed the speculative gleam in his eyes, she wondered if she had been entirely wise. "Very well, Miss Whitmore," Sheriff Morrison said, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll call for you at 8 sharp. I trust you have appropriate attire for riding." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had packed for a brief business trip, not for gallivanting about the wilderness on horseback. "I shall manage," she replied with more confidence than she felt. The sheriff's mouth quirked upward in what might have been amusement. "I'm sure you will." Catherine stood before the mirror in her small hotel room, contemplating her reflection with growing dismay. The divided riding skirt she had borrowed from the hotel proprietor's wife hung awkwardly on her slender frame, and the boots were at least a size too large. Her dark hair, usually arranged in a sophisticated chignon, had been braided down her back for practicality. She looked, she thought ruefully, like a child playing dress-up. A sharp knock at her door announced the sheriff's arrival. Catherine took a steadying breath and opened the door to find him waiting in the hallway, hat in hand. He had made some effort at tidiness, his shirt was clean, his hair combed back, and his badge gleamed against his vest. His gaze swept over her makeshift riding costume, and she braced herself for mockery. Instead, his expression remained carefully neutral. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore. Are you ready?" "Quite ready," she replied, gathering her borrowed gloves and the leather satchel containing her uncle's papers. The morning air carried a crispness that spoke of the approaching cooler months, and Catherine was grateful for the shawl she had wrapped around her shoulders. The sheriff led her to where 2 horses waited, their breath visible in small puffs of steam. "This is Daisy," he said, indicating a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. "She's steady and sure-footed. Perfect for he paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "For a tenderfoot from the east," Catherine supplied, lifting her chin. "I was going to say for a lady." Something in his tone made her look at him more closely. There was a grudging respect in his expression that had not been there the night before. The sheriff helped her into the saddle, his hands firm and impersonal as he adjusted her stirrups. Catherine tried to ignore the way her skin tingled where his fingers briefly touched her ankle, focusing instead on maintaining her balance and dignity. They rode out of town in companionable silence, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of hooves and the creaking of leather. The landscape around Cedar Ridge was unlike anything Catherine had ever seen. Vast and open, with rolling hills covered in scrub brush and the occasional stand of trees. The sky seemed impossibly large, stretching endlessly in all directions without the familiar boundaries of buildings and church spires. "Your uncle's property is about an hour's ride," the sheriff said, breaking the silence. "Good water, decent grazing. It's prime land." "You sound surprised." "I am, frankly. Most of the claims that come through here are worthless, played-out mining sites or land that won't support so much as a jackrabbit. But your uncle, he had an eye for value." Catherine felt a warm glow of pride. She had barely known her Uncle Thomas, but she was beginning to respect his judgment. What sort of man was he? Quiet. Kept to himself mostly, but he was fair in his dealings. Helped out when folks were in need. The sheriff glanced at her sideways. Nothing like his niece, apparently. "I beg your pardon." Most ladies would have taken one look at this country and caught the next stage back east. Catherine considered this. "Perhaps I am not like most ladies." "No," he agreed quietly. "I don't believe you are." The property exceeded Catherine's expectations. A small cabin sat nestled against a hillside, surrounded by tall grass and wildflowers that had gone to seed. A creek ran nearby, its water clear and cold, and beyond the immediate vicinity stretched acres of gently rolling land that seemed to go on forever. "It's beautiful," Catherine breathed, dismounting with only minimal assistance from the sheriff. "It's isolated," he countered. "The nearest neighbor is 5 miles that way," he pointed east, "and the town is even farther. No place for a woman alone." Catherine walked toward the cabin, running her hand along the weathered wood of the porch railing. "My uncle managed." "Your uncle was a man, and he was armed." "I can learn to shoot." The sheriff made a sound that might have been laughter or exasperation. "Miss Whitmore, do you have any idea what you're proposing? This isn't some romantic notion of pastoral life. This is hard country. The winters are brutal, the summers are scorching, and there are dangers you can't even imagine." Catherine turned to face him, her chin set stubbornly. "Are you trying to frighten me into leaving?" "I'm trying to save your life." The words hung between them, weighted with an intensity that made Catherine's breath catch. She studied his face, searching for signs of deception or manipulation, but found only genuine concern. "Why do you care what happens to me?" she asked softly. The sheriff looked away, his jaw working. "It's my job to keep people safe." "All people? Or just helpless Eastern ladies who don't know better?" "You're not helpless," he admitted grudgingly. "Last night proved that much." Catherine felt an unexpected flutter of pleasure at the compliment. "Then perhaps you should trust me to know my own mind." They spent the next hour exploring the property. The cabin was small but well built, with a stone fireplace and sturdy furniture that spoke of her uncle's practical nature. Behind the house, Catherine discovered a small garden plot, overgrown now but showing signs of having been carefully tended. "He grew vegetables," the sheriff explained, following her gaze. "Traded surplus with folks in town. A self-sufficient man. Had to be, out here." Catherine knelt beside the garden, pulling aside the weeds to reveal the remnants of bean poles and tomato stakes. It could be productive again. "Miss Whitmore," the sheriff said, his voice strained with patience, "you cannot seriously be considering staying here." "Why not?" She stood, brushing dirt from her borrowed skirt. "I have no ties in Boston. No family, no gentleman caller, no particular prospects. At least here I would have something of my own." "And if you fall ill? If you're injured? If winter comes early and you're snowed in for months?" "Then I shall deal with those challenges as they arise." Catherine met his gaze steadily. "I am stronger than I appear, Sheriff Morrison." "Jake," he said unexpectedly. "I beg your pardon?" "My name is Jake, and you're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the most foolish." Catherine smiled. "Perhaps both." They shared lunch on the cabin's front porch, simple fare that Jake had packed in his saddlebags. Catherine found herself studying his hands as he passed her a piece of bread. Strong, capable hands that looked as though they could handle both a gun and a plow with equal skill. "Tell me about Cedar Ridge," she said, settling back against the porch railing. "How long have you been sheriff?" 3 years come Christmas. Before that, I worked cattle ranches mostly. Drifted around quite a bit." He took a long drink from his canteen. "What about you? What did you do in Boston?" "I was a governess," Catherine admitted, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "For the Ashworth family. They were particular about their children's education." "Must have been a good position." "It was respectable," Catherine said carefully. The truth was more complicated. She had been dismissed after refusing the unwanted advances of Mr. Ashworth, but that was hardly something she could share with a man she barely knew. Jake seemed to sense her discomfort and changed the subject. Your uncle mentioned you in his letters sometimes. Said you were clever, well-read. He wrote to you? Not to me specifically. But small towns talk, and Thomas wasn't as private as he thought. He was proud of you, said you deserved better than you'd been given. Catherine felt tears well up in her eyes unexpectedly. She had known so little about her uncle, had barely corresponded with him over the years. To learn that he had thought of her, had cared about her circumstances, touched something deep inside her chest. I wish I had known him better, she said softly. He was a good man, honest, hard-working. He would have liked seeing you here, I think. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the afternoon shadows lengthen across the land. Catherine found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't experienced in years. There was something about the vastness of the sky and the gentle sound of the creek that soothed her troubled spirit. I still think you're making a mistake, Jake said eventually. Because I'm a woman. Because you're alone? He turned to look at her, his green eyes serious. This country doesn't forgive loneliness, Miss Whitmore. It swallows people up. Catherine, she said impulsively. My name is Catherine. Something flickered in his expression. Catherine, he repeated, and her name sounded different in his rough voice, softer somehow. I've been alone for most of my life, Sheriff Jake. At least here, I would be alone by choice, not circumstance. There's a difference. All the difference in the world. The ride back to town took longer than the morning journey, partly because Catherine was beginning to feel the effects of her first extended time in the saddle, and partly because Jake seemed in no hurry to return. He pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the area, and answered her endless questions about local customs and practices. The mercantile carries most basic supplies, he was saying as they crested a hill overlooking Cedar Ridge. But you'd need to order anything special from Denver, and that can take weeks. I'm accustomed to making do with what's available, Catherine replied, though privately she wondered how she would manage without her beloved books and the small luxuries that had made her constrained life in Boston bearable. There's a circuit preacher who comes through once a month, and we have a schoolmarm, Mrs. Henderson. She's been after the town council to build a proper school, but so far they've been meeting in the church. Catherine felt a spark of interest. What sort of education do the children receive? Reading, writing, arithmetic, basic stuff. Miss Henderson does her best, but she's got students ranging from 6 to 16, all in one room. And she manages alone? Has to. There's talk of hiring an assistant, but the town can't afford much, and most qualified folks don't want to come this far west. An idea began to form in Catherine's mind, but before she could pursue it, Jake drew his horse to a stop. His posture had changed, becoming alert and tense. What is it? Catherine asked, following his gaze toward town. Smoke. Too much smoke. He spurred his horse forward, and Catherine hurried to keep up. As they reached the outskirts of Cedar Ridge, the source of Jake's concern became apparent. The mercantile was ablaze, thick black smoke pouring from its windows while townspeople formed a bucket brigade from the well. Jake leaped from his horse before it had fully stopped and plunged into the chaos, shouting orders and organizing the firefighting efforts. Catherine dismounted more carefully, her legs unsteady after the long ride, and looked around for a way to help. Miss. A small voice caught her attention. A boy of perhaps 8 years old was tugging at her skirt, his face streaked with tears and soot. It's my ma, she's still inside. Without thinking, Catherine looked toward the burning building. Through the smoke, she could see Jake and several other men attempting to enter through the back door. The front entrance was completely engulfed in flames. Where was your mother when the fire started? Catherine asked, kneeling to the boy's level. Upstairs. She was checking inventory in the storage room. Catherine's mind raced. The men were trying to reach the upper floor through the main building, but what if there was another way? She had noticed an external staircase on many of the buildings in town, a common feature that allowed access to upper floors without going through the business below. Is there a back stairway? She asked the boy. He nodded eagerly. Round the side. Catherine gathered her skirts and ran, ignoring the protests of several townspeople who tried to stop her. She found the narrow wooden staircase exactly where the boy had indicated, though it was already beginning to smolder from the heat below. The door at the top was unlocked. Catherine plunged into the smoky interior, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" A weak voice answered from somewhere to her right. Catherine followed the sound, crawling on hands and knees beneath the worst of the smoke, until she found a middle-aged woman collapsed near a window. "Can you walk?" Catherine asked, grasping the woman's arm. "I think so," the woman gasped. "My ankle. I fell when the smoke got thick." Catherine helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight as they made their way back toward the door. The staircase was now fully aflame, but Catherine could hear voices below, Jake's voice, calling her name with desperate urgency. "Here," she shouted through the window. "We need a ladder." Within moments, Jake appeared at the top of a hastily arranged ladder, his face black with soot and fury. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded as he helped the injured woman through the window. "Saving a life?" Catherine replied, though she was beginning to realize the full magnitude of her impulsive action. The floor beneath her feet was growing dangerously hot. Jake's expression softened slightly. "Come on," he said, extending his hand. "Let's get you out of here." An hour later, Catherine sat in the hotel dining room, a cup of strong coffee warming her hands while the hotel proprietor's wife fussed over her soot-stained clothes. The fire had been contained before it could spread to other buildings, though the mercantile was a total loss. Jake appeared in the doorway, cleaned up but still showing signs of his battle with the flames. His shirt was scorched, and there was a bandage around his left hand. "How is Mrs. Patterson?" Catherine asked as he settled into the chair across from her. "She'll be fine. Sprained ankle and some smoke inhalation, but nothing serious." His green eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her shift uncomfortably. "Thanks to you. Anyone would have done the same." "No," Jake said quietly. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have waited for someone else to act." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I didn't think." "That's what worries me." But there was no censure in his tone, only a kind of amazed admiration. "You could have been killed." "But I wasn't." This time. Jake leaned forward, his expression serious. "Catherine, what you did today was incredibly brave and incredibly reckless. It proves my point about you staying here alone." "Does it? Or does it prove that I can handle myself in a crisis?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "You're not going to change your mind, are you?" "No," Catherine said firmly. "I'm not." "Then I have a proposition for you." Catherine raised an eyebrow, waiting. "The town needs a teacher," Jake continued. "Mrs. Henderson is getting on in years, and she could use the help. The pay isn't much, but it would give you a reason to be here, and a source of income." Catherine's pulse quickened. The idea of teaching again, of being useful, appealed to her enormously. "You think the town would accept an outsider?" "After today? I think you've proven yourself." Jake's mouth quirked in a small smile. "Besides, Mrs. Patterson has quite a lot of influence around here, and she's been singing your praises to anyone who'll listen." "And you, what do you think?" Jake was quiet for so long that Catherine began to wonder if he had heard her question. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "I think you're the most remarkable woman I've ever met. I think you're going to turn this town upside down, and I think—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "I think I'm in serious trouble." Catherine's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean that somewhere between watching you win that coin toss and seeing you risk your life for a stranger, I've developed feelings that are entirely inappropriate for a sheriff and a lady he's supposed to be protecting." The words hung between them, charged with possibility and danger. Catherine felt her world shift, realigning itself around this moment. This man, this unexpected declaration. "Jake," she whispered. "I know," he said quickly. "I know it's too soon, and I know you barely know me, and I know that a lawman in a rough town isn't much of a prospect for a refined lady like yourself." "You know quite a lot," Catherine said softly. "But you don't know everything." "Such as?" "Such as the fact that refined ladies don't generally bet their futures on coin tosses or run into burning buildings to save strangers." She reached across the table and touched his bandaged hand gently. "And they certainly don't find themselves fascinated by rugged sheriffs who care enough to argue with them about their choices." Jake's eyes widened. "Catherine." I came here looking for independence, she continued. But perhaps what I really need is partnership. Someone who will challenge me, support me, trust me to make my own decisions even when he disagrees with them. And you think I could be that someone? Catherine smiled. Why don't we find out? 3 months later, Catherine stood in the newly constructed schoolhouse, watching her students work diligently at their lessons. The autumn air that drifted through the open windows carried the scent of wood smoke and the promise of winter, but the room was warm with the satisfaction of productive work. Young Tommy Patterson, the boy who had alerted her to his mother's plight during the fire, looked up from his slate with a grin. Miss Catherine, I finished the arithmetic problems. Excellent, Tommy. Please help Mary with hers if she's having trouble. Catherine had discovered a talent for teaching that had been stifled during her years as a governess. Here, with children who were eager to learn despite their diverse backgrounds and abilities, she felt truly useful for the first time in her life. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention to the window. Jake was dismounting from his horse, and Catherine felt the familiar flutter of anticipation that his presence always brought. Children, please continue with your reading while I speak with Sheriff Morrison. She stepped onto the schoolhouse porch, smoothing her practical brown dress and tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Jake's eyes lit up as he saw her, and the smile that crossed his face made her feel beautiful despite her modest attire. Good afternoon, Miss Whitmore, he said formally, touching the brim of his hat. Sheriff Morrison, she replied with equal formality, though her eyes sparkled with mischief. To what do we owe the pleasure? Official business, I'm afraid. Jake's expression grew serious. There's been some trouble at the mining camp. I'll be riding out this afternoon and won't be back until late tomorrow. Catherine felt a familiar stab of worry. Jake's job frequently took him into dangerous situations, and she had learned to live with the constant low-level fear that something might happen to him. Be careful, she said softly. Always am. Jake stepped closer, lowering his voice. There's something else. Mrs. Henderson stopped by the office this morning. She's made a decision about the school. Catherine's stomach tightened. Mrs. Henderson had been considering retirement for weeks, but Catherine had hoped she would wait until the end of the school year. She's leaving after Christmas, Jake continued, which means the town needs a permanent teacher, someone who's proven herself capable of handling the position. They want me to take over completely? The town council voted unanimously this morning. The salary isn't much, but it would be steady income, and it comes with the use of the teacherage. Catherine had seen the small cottage behind the schoolhouse, simple but adequate for a single woman. The idea of having her own home, her own position, her own place in the community was almost too wonderful to believe. There's one more thing, Jake said, and something in his tone made her look at him more closely. What? Mrs. Henderson also mentioned that she thought it was high time you had a proper escort to social functions. Seems she's been talking to some of the other ladies in town, and they're all in agreement that a young woman in your position needs protection. Catherine bristled slightly. I've been managing quite well on my own. I know you have, but the ladies have a point about propriety. A school teacher has to be above reproach. And Jake cleared his throat, looking unexpectedly nervous. And I was wondering if you might consider allowing me to serve in that capacity. Catherine stared at him. You want to be my escort? I want to be more than that, Jake said quietly, but I'll settle for whatever you're willing to give me. The words sent warmth flooding through Catherine's chest. Over the past months, she and Jake had developed a friendship that was deeper and more satisfying than any relationship she had ever known. They talked about everything: books, politics, dreams, fears, and she had come to depend on his steady presence in her life. But friendship, she was beginning to realize, was no longer enough. Jake, she said carefully, what exactly are you asking me? I'm asking if you do me the honor of walking out with me, officially, with the understanding that my intentions are entirely serious and entirely honorable. Catherine felt tears in her eyes. And what are your intentions exactly? Jake took her hands in his, heedless of any students who might be watching from the schoolhouse windows. My intention, he said solemnly, is to court you properly, with the hope that someday you might consider becoming my wife. Catherine's breath caught. Jake. I know it's not what you planned when you came here. I know you were looking for independence, not marriage. But Catherine, what we have together, this partnership we've built, it doesn't diminish your independence. It enhances it. How do you mean? You make me better, stronger, more thoughtful, and I hope, I pray, that I do the same for you." Jake's green eyes were earnest, vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "We're a team, Catherine. In everything. Your dreams matter as much as mine. Your voice carries as much weight as mine. Marry me and you won't be gaining a master, you'll be gaining an equal partner for life." Catherine felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You beautiful, impossible man," she whispered. "Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll walk out with you. Yes, I'll let you court me properly. And yes, when you ask me to marry you, really ask me, I'll say yes to that too." Jake let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses and brought several curious faces to the schoolhouse windows. Then he swept Catherine into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, his expression grew tender. "I love you, Catherine Whitmore. I love your courage, your stubbornness, your generous soul, and your brilliant mind. I love the way you've made this town better just by being in it." "I love you too, Jake Morrison," Catherine replied, reaching up to touch his cheek. "I love your integrity, your strength, your protective instincts, and your willingness to let me be myself." Jake leaned down and kissed her then, softly and sweetly, while the children in the schoolhouse pressed their faces against the windows and giggled. When they broke apart, Catherine smiled up at him. "Now, don't you have some official business to attend to?" "In a minute," Jake said, his arms still around her waist. "First, I want to savor this moment. The moment I realized that sometimes the best things in life are worth wagering everything for." Catherine laughed. "Is that what we did? Wagered everything?" "That first night, when you called that coin toss, you bet your future on a 50-50 chance. And thank God you did, because you won so much more than a fair hearing about your uncle's property." "What did I win?" Jake's smile was radiant. "You won a home. A purpose. A community that adores you. And if you'll have me, you won a man who will love you for the rest of his life." Catherine stood on her tiptoes and kissed him again, tasting joy and promise, and the sweet certainty of a future she had never dared to dream. "I'll have you," she whispered against his lips. "I'll have all of it." As Jake mounted his horse and rode away toward his duties, Catherine returned to her students with her soul singing. She had come to Cedar Ridge seeking independence, and had found something infinitely better, a partnership that would challenge her, support her, and love her for exactly who she was. The coin had landed heads, and she had won far more than she had ever imagined possible. Epilogue. 1 year later, Catherine Morrison stood in the doorway of her schoolhouse, watching her husband address a group of concerned citizens about recent troubles with cattle rustlers. The town had grown in the past year, and with growth came new challenges, but Jake handled each situation with the steady competence that had first attracted her to him. "Mrs. Morrison," Tommy Patterson appeared at her elbow, now grown taller and more serious in his role as her assistant teacher. "Should I dismiss the children for the day?" "Yes, Tommy. And please remind them about the spelling examination tomorrow." Catherine's hand drifted unconsciously to her still flat stomach, where a new life was just beginning to make itself known. She and Jake had not yet discussed the changes that would come with their growing family, but she was confident they would face those challenges as they had faced all the others, together, as equal partners in the grand adventure of their shared life. The sheriff's wager had indeed paid off handsomely, bringing her not just a husband but a home, a purpose, and a love that grew stronger with each passing day. Sometimes, Catherine reflected, the greatest gambles yielded the greatest rewards,